Right, so after filming the first video, I was like, let's take the nerdiness up by tenfold. And what's more more nerdy than reading maths? That was terrible pacing. But anyway, I guess I'm so excited to tell you. Anyway, okay, so my display is changed up slightly. I've now got my Powerpuff Girls and Crybaby collaboration blind box Bunny Blossom. But she won't sit up. And again, the books are balancing precariously, so you know what? Let's put her down here. Can you see her? Put her there. Oh no. Oh no. Does that stay? Okay, I'm not sure. We'll see if that stays. Anyway, so if you don't know, I originally made the first video that I made in this series, which is inspired by basically what I'm watching and the answers that I want to know about random things and like think pieces or whatever, is how like social media has impacted reading and how it's kind of like cool or aesthetic to read now where it definitely wasn't before. And so I did have some data, but I didn't share that in the previous one, so you'll get to experience it now if you want to. If not, if you hate maths, I'm really sorry. Yeah, so I guess let's go, because it is, honestly, the data is quite fascinating, because I noticed when I was like looking into the stats that there's almost like a complete inversion of like traditional publishing hierarchy, like the things that would be important or would bring in the most revenue in traditional publishing previously has completely shifted. And so for most of like the 20th and early 21st century, a lot of sales was dictated by like a prestige model. So that's when a book would win a major award. Not to say that doesn't apply now, but there is a shift. So for example, if they won like a Booker Prize, a Women's Prize, a Pulitzer Prize, that kind of thing, right? Or if it's by a author who has a reputation, or if it's, for example, if it's a non-fiction book, it's if they have a specific thing that they will talk about that's reputable, or, you know, like they're a celebrity, that kind of thing. But another way would be when they received reviews in like broadsheet newspapers. I'm talking like the Times, you know, the Independent, that kind of thing. And then you would see like a bump in sales. Today, we focus more on the viral model, and I think I talked about that in the previous video. But essentially, the numbers that you see are completely different because it operates on a completely different scale in terms of velocity and volume. Because things, as you know, the way things go viral is crazy. But anyway, let's get into the stats here, because there's an economic shift that needs to be represented. So let's first start with the viral multiplier. So we're looking at algorithm versus academy. So there's a big gap between when a book is like a BookTok sensation or it's a literary award winner. So it's not just a small thing, but there's a big thing. So you have the prestige bump, like I talked about, Booker Prize, that kind of thing, which guarantees some type of spike in sales, usually moving books that were moving maybe 20,000 copies to 200,000 copies in that year. And that would have been considered, or is considered, a massive success in the literary world. But now we have the viral explosion. So if we're looking in contrast, we have viral authors like Colleen Hoover and Sarah J. Maas, who are essentially moving in millions, like millions of units. So I think what I saw was that in 2022, Colleen Hoover had sold like almost like over 14 million copies just in the US of her books. And that, just to put into perspective, is more copies than the Bible sold that year. I know we're becoming a less religious society, but still, in comparison, a typical book that would have won or has won a Booker Prize might have sold like 250,000 copies in a year if it's been a good year. Colleen Hoover's It Ends With Us, which was, I think, originally published in like 2016 or something, sold 4 million copies. in just 1 year because it went viral. So if we think about the ratio, for every one book that sells because it's won some prestigious literary award, a BookTok author could sell anywhere from 50 to 100 copies of their book. So we see why people are leaning a specific way. But there's also been a disruptive economic change, you could call it like the Lazarus effect, or like the resurrection of the backlist. And so normally you have a traditional publishing cycle, so publishers will historically focus like 90% of their marketing budgets on like the front list. So that's like books that have been released in the last 6 to 12 months, and if the books didn't like become a hit within the first 3 months of its publication, it's essentially considered dead. But now we have the social media cycle where the algorithm doesn't really care about publication dates, but rather it cares about like engagement and like stuff like that. I think I mentioned in my previous video, like Song of Achilles was published in 2011, but in 2020, so that's 9 years later, a TikTok video went viral and sales skyrocketed, and it boosted sales to like 2 million copies annually, and that was much later. So the impact is that I think in the 2023-2024 financial season, backlist book titles, so books that are older than 2 years old, accounted for approximately 70% of all book sales, which is crazy. Before, people were buying like new books that came out that year, but now social media has effectively forced publishers to revive their old inventory and make it like a gold mine, and try and see how much they can pump out from those kind of books that they published so long ago, which is great for some people. Like you even see like a boost in authors coming back. So like I went to see Jacqueline Wilson's talk recently, and she stopped publishing for a while. I used to read all of her books when I was a little kid because she essentially was writing for children. And now she's writing about the same characters but for adults, now that the kids in those books have grown up. Resurgence, you know what I mean? But we also have like the quote-unquote whale readers. So, I'm actually not sure if I should have phrased it that way, but we're talking about the volume of consumption. So there's been a big resurgence and consumer behaviours have changed, and so a lot of people are trying to, or are buying more than they need essentially, and so there's a big volume of consumption. So literary fiction readers statistically tend to buy like 3 to 12 books a year, and then they'll savour those books, read them slowly, critically, that kind of thing. On the other hand, romantasy, or like people who are reading viral books, or like whale consumers, actually that's so terrible, I feel like I shouldn't say that. Anyway, they're buying 2 to 5 books a week. And that's caused a big growth in the genre. So we've got an explosion in like the romantasy genre, whose like sales have grown by over 40% in the year 2023 to 2024. You also have box set culture. So a lot of these viral books are like part of a series, usually like 3 to 5 books or whatever. And so a single viral video doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to sell just one unit. It usually is selling the entire box set. Like, so you can convert one reader who likes Sarah J. Maas into like, I think she has 15 books or something right now. So her current whatever her current bibliography is what she has. Whereas converting a reader to a literary author, you might only get them to buy the latest standalone novel rather than the entire series that they may have written, particularly because they're standalone. So who holds the power? Like who is the consumer? I don't really know, is the answer. But there is still traditional literary success, but the viral social media success is particularly taking over. So if we talk about the primary drivers in traditional success, we're talking about critics, New York Times awards, that kind of thing. And most of the readers for that kind of literary success is, I should read this to like be informed. I don't know if you guys seen these videos, but there's this one creator, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but her like prompt is, these are the books I would read to be disgustingly well read, and I freaking love that. But the sale life spikes at a launch but fades very quickly, and the audience is usually older, affluent, in terms of their education. They may have had a more literary education, for them to like those kind of things. So they're like, I don't want to say the classics, because they will read contemporary fiction and literary fiction, but it's a very specific type of reading they're trying to do. They're trying to read to learn, or to listen to something that hasn't been said before, which is quite different from what you might see for viral success, or like social media success, because usually people will like one specific type of content and then they'll just keep trying to consume the same thing, which is why you've seen such a explosion in the same kind of content. And so the primary driver is like small, very short, quick, snappy, emotional reaction videos, and then the reader wants to essentially feel something, so that's their motivation. And sometimes you can, obviously new books and new marketers are using this, but originally it was bringing back books from the backlist, like books from like 5 years ago or more. And so the audience is usually a bit more young, a bit more diverse, global, hyper online, but also people who are trying to consume the same kind of thing. So if we like try to summarize the shift, basically reading isn't just cool, it's like consumable, and the industry has moved from like a slow model with like prestige, critique, slow digestion into like a fast fashion version where it's high volume, very trend driven, intense, instant emotional gratification. And while like critics might argue that this may lower the quality of popular literature, the numbers argue that I think it might have actually saved a slightly dying industry. Yeah, anyway, that's enough for me. So whoever the maths queens are, I got you, and I've got the stats for you. And I guess we'll find out at the end of the 2025-2026 financial year if those numbers kept growing, because I definitely think there was probably a big bloom around the like TikTok boom phase, so like pandemic times, and I'm just wondering how that works. And also, of course, they've got the Kindle thing, like people be loving those 99p Kindle books. Crazy that they can do that. You know what's even crazier is when sometimes a book is more expensive or equally expensive on Kindle as it is to just buy it hardback or paperback. But then I understand, because then otherwise more people would just buy it Kindle if it was like significantly cheaper, and then the whole printing thing would come in. So, it's a big balance, isn't it? It's always pros and cons, always pros and cons. Anyway, I feel like I spoke not in a very calming or relaxing way, so I'm really sorry for assaulting your ears with my voice, and I'll see you in the next one. I already have my like notes lined up for that one. I told you I become a little obsessed, so I will see you in the next one.